Welcome back to Shadows of the Unknown USA. Before we go to our next event, let us remind you of our email address, hutalap@gmail.com. As it is written, I'm reading it as is. Assalamu alaikum. I hope you're well. I know you're always on the good side, so I didn't even ask how you're doing. This is Shakil. I sent an incident a while back, but maybe it wasn't selected for some reason. Still, with some hope, I decided to write again. Please forgive any mistakes in my writing. I hope you'll read this story to your listeners, and I'd be thrilled if you do so, which will encourage me to send more in the future. Currently, we have our final exams coming up in our Diploma in Engineering program, so I went to the college to collect my admit card. While leaving, I ran into an old friend of mine, Hridoy, with whom I shared a lot of memories. We enrolled in college together, stayed in the hostel, and even shared a room, so our friendship grew close over time. Hridoy looked noticeably thinner, so I asked if he was sick or dealing with any major health issues. In response, he placed my hand above his right elbow and asked, "Can you feel this?" I felt something through his shirt and guessed it was a charm. He confirmed it, saying, "Yes, it's a talisman. Black magic has been done on me." For a while, I'd been searching for a real black magic story to share on Poot.com, so with curiosity I asked Hridoy to tell me what happened. We decided to go to Barnali, a nearby tea stall, and while sipping tea, he started narrating his story. Hridoy explained that he'd had several strange encounters throughout his life. A close relative had once cast black magic on him, which affected his health. To counter the spell, he wore a charm. One day after finishing high school, he went to his village for a break. His aunt, his uncle's wife, prepared various dishes for the family, though his mother wouldn't let him eat any. I didn't understand her reasons back then. One day, his aunt asked him to sacrifice a young pigeon. Later, she brought a dish made with pigeon meat to their house, but Hridoy's mother still wouldn't let him eat it. He managed to eat a few pieces, though, since pigeon meat was a favorite of his. A few days later, strange things started happening. One night, while lying in bed, he heard a cracking sound near the window, like someone chewing bones. He thought it might be a dog, but the sound grew louder, and eventually, he sensed something moving from the west window to the south one. It felt as if someone was standing there, speaking in a hoarse voice, telling him that the same crunching would happen to him. Another night, he saw a huge black figure with long hair and glowing eyes. Its hair sometimes appeared long, sometimes short, as if switching between masculine and feminine forms. Hridoy ran back inside, feeling a chill run down his spine. He tried not to let it get to him too much, as he'd encountered strange things before. Some days later, he visited the market with a neighbor. As they passed a cemetery, their battery-powered van suddenly stopped. The driver told them he couldn't fix it, so they'd have to walk the rest of the way. As he walked, Hridoy felt as if something was pulling him into the ground, and he could barely move. With his friend's help, he struggled past the cemetery, though he continued to feel weak. Back home, he was hit by a high fever and severe chills. Even under several blankets, he couldn't get warm. His sister called their parents, and they, worried, took him to a spiritual healer. The healer attempted to remove the spell, giving him a charm, though he continued to feel weak and emaciated over time. A neighbor suggested taking him to a Hindu healer who was experienced with black magic. Upon seeing Hridoy, the healer confirmed that a serious spell had been cast on him. He then gave a special herb mixture that caused him to vomit profusely, purging the harmful magic that had been ingested through food. Despite the treatment, Hridoy still couldn't sleep. 3 years passed this way, unable to get restful sleep, until one day his mother brought another healer. This healer detected remnants of black magic lingering in their home, uncovering charms hidden throughout the rooms, and finally they managed to bring peace to the house. Since then, Hridoy had been able to sleep better, though he continued to carry a charm as a precaution. He ended his story, leaving me deep in thought about how cruel people can be to resort to such dark actions. If you share this story, please let me know. The story is 100% true, and anyone who wants to verify it can contact me. I can also share what happened to a friend of mine while he was learning black magic, for those interested. Welcome back, everyone. Without further ado, let's dive straight into our story. This is the third email, and I hope you're all enjoying it so far. Let's get started. I'll read it exactly as it's written. Assalamu alaikum. I hope you're well and always in good spirits. Alhamdulillah. Please forgive any mistakes in the writing. I want to share with you a terrifying night that happened to me, an experience I still cannot fully explain. In late December 2016, I used to play badminton at a field near the Northeast Baniari School. I'd walk there with my racket, about a 10-minute walk from the market. Every night, I'd play from 8 to 11 p.m. and then walk home alone. On one particular night, I got so involved in the game that time slipped by, and I only realized it was 1 a.m. when we finally wrapped up and I started heading home. The path home from the school leads through a large bamboo grove, which was eerily dark even during the day, creating a haunting atmosphere. On the way, I had to cross a wooden bridge over the Baleshwar River, an ancient river known as a dead river due to its stillness. With my phone flashlight on, I walked through the thick winter fog, where visibility was barely 5 to 10 feet. As I neared the bamboo grove, I felt a sudden, warm gust of wind and heard faint, whispering sounds. The air carried a heavy, fishy smell that made me want to hold my breath. Out of nowhere, I noticed 3 human-like figures moving through the grove toward me. I was not prepared for what I saw next. The 3 figures transformed into 2 cats and a dog with strange, feral faces, unlike anything I had ever seen. Their blood-red, enraged eyes stared directly at me. Terrified, I tried to walk past them, but it felt like they were blocking my way. The dense fog around them added to the frightful silence and the calls of distant crickets. Unable to move, I closed my eyes and prayed, realizing that whatever was happening wasn't natural. Just as I was reciting the verses I could remember, I felt a powerful force pulling at my legs, as if several hands were holding me back. Then I heard harsh voices accusing me of disturbing their rest. I was so terrified that I couldn't look back. Shivering in fear, I screamed, "Allah!" and leapt forward, trying to run, though I felt weighed down by something. After running for what felt like ages, I finally spotted the wooden bridge. Crossing it brought a sense of relief, and I faintly heard a voice behind me saying I had escaped for the night. I reached the market, limping on a twisted ankle, while the dogs began barking at me. Exhausted, I stumbled to my front door, grateful that my mother always left it unlocked for me. I slipped inside, bolted the door, and lay down, trembling until dawn. When I finally looked at the clock, it was 4 a.m. The next morning, I couldn't get out of bed due to a fever, and my twisted ankle was swollen. After 10 days of medication and injections, I was finally able to walk normally again. I shared the story with an elder in our village who explained that I had likely encountered ancient malevolent spirits. Following the elder's advice, I completed some rituals, and he blessed water for me to drink, which eventually helped me recover. Since that night, I have never returned to play badminton at that field. This story is 100% true. Only those who've experienced such terror can understand the feeling. Thank you very much for reading the email aloud, and there are many more stories about the Baleshwar River. I'll come to the studio sometime to tell them all. Please keep me in your prayers. Marashik Islam Wahid, thank you very much for sharing your story. I hope our listeners enjoyed it as well, and I encourage you to send more stories in the future. Yes, if it seems like we're reading a few more emails than usual today, please remind me, as I am indeed reading a bit extra today. Also, there are many people tuned in with us today, which is a good sign. Let's finish the final email for today. I'll start reading it as it's written. Hello, Assalamu alaikum, my name is Fariha. Then she shares her phone number, email address, and writes that she's writing from the USA. She requests that her details not be shared, and she mentions that she has many personal stories, sending some now and promising to send more later. Story 1. I live in an apartment complex near Washington, D.C. The area is very normal but sparsely populated. After moving in, I discovered that no tenant stays in this apartment building for more than 2 or 3 months. I didn't think much about it initially, especially since I got a good deal. But after 2 or 3 months, my husband began to act strangely. He would get angry over trivial things, and we had frequent arguments. I noticed that sometimes his eyes would turn very red. One day, I noticed something unusual about my husband's shadow, and I was frightened. I asked him to recite Ayat al-Kursi, but he couldn't say a single word. Given my previous paranormal experiences, I sensed that something was wrong. I began to regularly recite the protective surahs, Surah An-Nas, Surah Al-Falaq, the three Quls, and Ayat al-Kursi 11 times each night. That night, nothing else happened. However, the next evening, my pets started behaving strangely. They wouldn't enter our bedroom. Thinking it might be an issue with our pet dog bothering the cat, I checked the room. I saw the closet door wide open, which never happened before. As I moved closer to close it, a gust of wind suddenly blew through the closet. My dog started barking uncontrollably. I recited prayers and tried to sleep, but I couldn't fall asleep that night. At around 3 a.m, I saw my husband talking in his sleep. He spoke a few words in a language I couldn't understand, so I searched Google and found that they had Arabic meanings. I looked towards the closet. It was open again. My husband woke up, but he didn't remember anything about his dream. Over the next few nights, I would be startled awake by our dog barking at the closet. Its door would be mysteriously open, even though all windows were shut. The door was a sliding type, impossible to open on its own. I finally spoke to my parents, and they suggested playing Surah Baqarah at night. We did this, and although the TV remote was on the nightstand, it was off when we woke up, and somehow the recitation had stopped midway. After speaking to a religious scholar, I followed his advice not to skip any prayers. Since then, things have calmed down. We're still living in that apartment. Story 2. My husband had an encounter while driving Uber. One night after finishing work, he felt something strike his car. He looked around, but there was no car or animal nearby. Despite the speed, which was about 50 miles per hour, there was no trace of what hit the car. A few days later, while driving along the same road, he saw a huge white albino deer, which is rare in this area. The Native Americans consider white deer a sacred spirit, and this area had historical significance to them. Many people see the white deer, though no one knows why. Story 3. The Spirit of the Champa Tree. When I was in 10th grade in Chittagong, my father, a senior government official, lived in an official bungalow on a hill. The entire area had paranormal issues. One day, workers came to repaint the bungalow, and they removed some clay plates with Quranic verses inscribed on them. That evening, there was a power outage, so I went to the veranda for fresh air. I stood under a large champa tree, enjoying the scent of its flowers. Suddenly, someone threw sand on me. I screamed, and my father rushed over. Only the champa tree was swaying violently, though no other tree moved. The next day, a few religious scholars came and hammered nails into the champa tree and other large trees. We later learned that the area was inhabited by spirits, and that disturbing the clay plates had triggered this problem. They warned me not to go out with loose hair or uncovered. One evening, my father and I saw a shadowy figure swaying from a distant tree, its eyes green and piercing. This became an everyday occurrence, and over time I learned to live with it. Thank you very much for your stories. We've been waiting for stories from America, and finally, they arrived. Thank you very much, and I hope you'll send us more stories in the future. Events happening in your country and beyond. We want to know about all the events happening in your country and outside it. Write to us quickly and send your stories. We're eagerly waiting for your stories and hope we can share them soon. Thank you very much. We're moving on to our next story, so without further ado, let's get started. Peace be upon you. I hope you're all on the path of goodness and will remain so. A while back, I shared a few stories that might not have been selected or broadcasted, so they were not aired. However, out of love, here's another story I'm sharing today. The incident involved my elder uncle. Today, I'll narrate to you what happened with him. My name is Mohammed Hridoy Ahmed Yamin, and the story involves my elder uncle, who was exceptionally skilled at fishing in the village where our maternal grandfather's home is. My elder uncle is no longer with us, and he passed away some time ago. The incident occurred one monsoon season in my grandfather's village, where people engaged in fishing activities enthusiastically, using various techniques like nets, rods, and other fishing tools. My uncle was an expert at this, particularly during the daytime. However, he would go fishing at night with a torchlight and catch fish along the water's edge. One rainy day, the waters were quite high. I don't recall it precisely since I was young, but I heard about it from my mother and grandfather. So as usual, my uncle set out to fish with his gear, a torchlight in hand, and a bag for collecting fish. He started walking through the village paths, where water was plentiful on both sides. As he progressed, he began catching fish that came toward the water's edge. The village folk usually fish in groups, so as my uncle kept moving, he went further to the village's outskirts. The moon was bright that night, and he thought of crossing a small open area known as Panguti, where strange events were known to happen. He felt he could find some excellent fish if he went a bit farther. Upon crossing to the other side, he continued fishing with his torchlight, losing track of time, and it was nearing 10 or 11 p.m. Suddenly, he realized he had wandered close to a place called Bagmara Bridge, known to be a haunted spot. As he approached, he noticed that his fish bag had become considerably lighter, though he hadn't encountered anything unusual. Then, from the darkness near the bridge, he heard the faint sound of a crying baby. He couldn't fathom where a baby's cry might come from in such an isolated spot. As he approached the bridge's edge, he saw something like a sack among the bushes and realized the sound was coming from within it. He thought someone must have abandoned the baby. He took the sack carefully, thinking he might raise it himself or give it to someone without children. When he finally took the baby in his hands, the crying stopped suddenly. He thought the baby had calmed down after sensing human touch. As he continued walking, he noticed the fish bag felt increasingly lighter. When he looked inside with his torchlight, he found only fish bones and heads left, as if some creature had gnawed at the flesh. Terrified, he decided to check the baby again, only to discover that the sack now held a pitch-black cat with human-like eyes, no nose, and an extremely wide mouth that stretched from ear to ear. Horrified by this sight, he immediately tossed his fishing rod and torchlight and jumped into the nearby water, swimming away frantically. Shaken and exhausted, he reached the village path and fled home, leaving his fishing tools behind. Later, I heard this story from my grandmother and mother, and it frightened me immensely. My uncle must have been terrified beyond words when he faced this strange creature. After rushing towards his home, he finally reached near his yard. As he entered the yard, he noticed that the black cat was sitting right in the middle, its white teeth clearly visible in the moonlight. The cat's eyes gleamed in the night, and seeing this, he instinctively swung the stick in his hand at the cat, perhaps in a desperate attempt to save his life. He hit the cat with all his might, injuring it badly. The cat limped away after being struck. Moments later, my uncle collapsed in the yard, screaming, and eventually fainted. The family members came out of the house and carried him inside. When he regained consciousness in the morning, he narrated everything to my grandfather. Hearing this, my grandfather brought a healer from the neighboring village. This healer was knowledgeable in the Quran, almost like an Islamic cleric, and sometimes treated people experiencing unusual incidents. The healer assured my grandfather that he did everything he could, but added that my uncle had seriously hurt the creature. It wasn't just any cat, it was a mischievous entity in disguise that had only intended to frighten him. If it had wanted to harm him fatally, it could have drowned him in the nearby pond. However, it was only playing tricks on him. The healer explained that this was a small, naughty entity from a family of similar beings. When my uncle hit it with the stick, it must have killed the entity, because the stick was never found again. After this incident, my uncle was deeply disturbed, developing a fear that made him jump at even the smallest sounds. The healer advised my grandfather to arrange my uncle's marriage as soon as possible, suggesting that after marriage, such entities would be less likely to disturb him. He gave a time frame of 4 months. My grandfather immediately began searching for a bride and managed to arrange a marriage within 4.5 months. The bride's father, even before the marriage, gifted my grandfather a cow, saying, "Take this now, so when my daughter moves to your home, she will receive this cow." However, 5 months later, the cow died, and shortly after, my uncle passed away as well. The bride's family was deeply saddened by his death, and despite not being related by blood, they maintained a strong relationship with our family. A few days later, my grandfather met with the healer again, who reminded him that he had advised marriage within 4 months, but they had taken longer. According to the healer, the delay had given the mischievous beings a chance to harm my uncle, gradually causing his decline from within. Following my uncle's death, our family mourned deeply, but eventually things returned to normal. Since then, there have been no more incidents with my grandfather's family. That's the story. If you found it interesting, please share it with others. This story occurred just 2 days ago. I was getting up for Tahajjud prayer around 12:45 a.m., making ablution and preparing for prayer. While I was trying to light incense, I struggled to get a flame despite having multiple lighters. Finally, I managed to light one after several attempts and placed it in my room to create a fragrant atmosphere. I started my prayer, but as I began reciting the first surah, I felt a strong tug on my shirt from behind. Surprised, I looked back, but saw no one. I thought it was strange since the door was locked and no one was behind me. Still feeling uneasy, I continued my prayer. This time, I felt a gust of warm air push me forward, almost causing me to fall. I turned again, but saw nothing. My wife asked me if something was wrong, sensing my fear. After assuring her, I continued my prayer, but noticed a distinct fragrance, different from the incense, a pleasant, perfume-like aroma. Having heard that good entities emit a pleasant fragrance while negative ones smell foul, I assumed this could be a good spirit. However, the strong pull on my shirt left visible impressions, as though someone had firmly gripped it with 2 fingers. Even though I'd heard such stories before, I thought these were just figments of imagination created by praying alone at night. After experiencing this firsthand, I now realize that such things can indeed happen during prayer, even to those who are steadfast in faith. Thank you for reading my story. We will move on to our next event directly and hope you will enjoy this one. Assalamu alaikum. This is Shaheen speaking. Currently, I am employed. In the beginning, I missed a few episodes, but later I caught up on all the stories on YouTube at my convenience. Honestly, your voice tone and the way you narrate makes it so believable that it's hard not to believe the stories. I've been thinking for a long time to share a little story of something that happened to me. Due to work, I couldn't find the time until now, so without further ado, let me start my story. The year was 2010. We had just started building our new house. Before going further, I should mention that our house was located right on the border of Natoré, at the very edge, and right where Rajshahi starts. So by default, it was deep in the village. Being in a village meant our area was surrounded by a lot of greenery and jungle. Natoré is a region full of wetlands, so when we tore down our old house to build a new one, there was still an old tin shed near it. After moving into our new house, everything seemed normal for about the first 7 to 8 days, but then something strange started happening. One night, around 2 or 3 in the morning, I heard something. I should mention that my room in the new house had 2 windows, one on the east side and one on the south. There were 2 graves visible from each window. In one grave rested my grandfather and grandmother. We all knew the other grave was there, but it was unclear whose it was. Then, around midnight, a woman's voice started calling me from near the mango tree beside my grandparents' grave. I thought it was just my imagination, so I tried to sleep. That night, nothing else happened, and I slept through the night. The next day, I kept my father's motorcycle in my room and went to sleep around 11 p.m. Then around 3 in the morning, something happened. The motorcycle that was beside my bed on the floor was no longer there. Instead, a small child was crawling around on the floor. I couldn't move, as if I was paralyzed. I was lying there, unable to move or say anything. I could feel something pressing on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Eventually, I lost consciousness from fear. When I woke up the next morning around 10, I shared the incident with my parents. They said it was just a dream or my imagination, and I didn't give it much thought. The next night, I left the motorcycle in the room again and went to sleep. What happened that night was the most frightening of all. I never expected it. I fell asleep around midnight, and while I was in a semi-conscious state, I heard someone calling me from outside the door. I couldn't wake up fully, but I could hear someone calling my name. When I tried to sleep again, around 3 in the morning, I found myself in the tin shed. It was raining heavily. I called out to my parents from there, thinking they were inside, but no one could hear me. With great difficulty, I managed to reach the door, but it felt as though someone was pulling me back. I closed my eyes and screamed loudly, and that's when I woke up, drenched in sweat and exhausted. The next day, I told my parents about this incident, and they noticed there was indeed something wrong. At that time, I was in grade 10 in 2010. My parents called a religious leader to perform some rituals in our house. Afterward, the house was spiritually secured. For the following nights, everything seemed to settle down, but I continued to have strange dreams where someone would tell me things weren't going well. There are many other small incidents, but today I am sharing this for the first time. If you liked it, please share it. Greetings to all listeners, and if you found this story interesting, please share it. Wishing everyone well. Allah Hafez. Welcome back, and thank you all so much for staying with us until now. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel to stay updated on future content. We hope to travel a long way together. That's all for today. Stay well, stay healthy, and most importantly, stay with Shadows of the Unknown USA. Allah Hafez.